Calvin Klein. You've probably worn the clothes. Today, we're talking to the person who led the organization for many years, right here on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to talk about leadership, teamwork, organizational culture, and human potential with experts from every walk of life. Your host is Kevin Eikenberry, a best-selling author and leadership thought leader for 25 years. This episode is sponsored by Kevin's book, The Long Distance Leader: Rules for Remarkable Remote Leadership. Order your copy today at remarkablepodcast.com/book. And now, here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. I'm glad you're here today. We have a guest today, and you've often heard me say that our guests are either leadership experts or expert leaders. I think our guest today is both. Let me introduce you to him. His name is Tom Murry. He is the retired CEO of Calvin Klein, where he ran the company for 17 years and facilitated the brand's growth from $2.8 billion to $8 billion. Prior to that, he spent the majority of his career working for the iconic fashion brands, including Tahari and Evan Pacone. He has worked with and learned from the most recognized names in fashion, as well as titans of the business world. With the same no-nonsense approach that he applies to fashion, Tom shares his knowledge about business, leadership, and creating a career that one can both be proud of and then one that is of service to others. He and his beloved junior high school sweetheart, Linda Murry, recently celebrated 43 years of marriage and now live in Palm Beach, Florida. Tom, welcome.
Thank you, Kevin.
And congratulations to you and Linda. I think I got a peek of Linda before we went live here a few minutes ago. So I congratulate her as well.
Well, we actually have been married for 44 years.
Okay, so we need to get the PR people to update the bio. 44 years. You're about 10 ahead of me. So
okay.
Congratulations. And I'm so glad you're here. We're going to talk about Tom's journey. We're going to talk about a new book that he has coming out before too awful long. We'll get to all that. But first, tell us a little bit about your leadership journey, if you will. Just sort of a little bit about how you got to where you were, and just fill us in a little bit.
Well, I started actually in junior high school selling menswear after school and during summers. And that's how I really got my start in the industry, my love for the industry. And I learned a lot about consumer behavior, which is a key component to being successful in this business. And really, just to make a long story short, I worked my way up from there and continued until I ended up running Calvin Klein. So that's a little bit about my story.
Well, but I think there's another piece somewhere in what I read said that you also worked in the oil fields. Now that's a little different than selling menswear. So talk about how did you end up in the oil fields for a while, number one, and then, so it's how did you end up there? Tell us about that piece of the story for a second.
Well, that was a summer job. And my dad, who was a friend of the guy named Howard Barksdale, who was the CEO of Kerr McGee, who owned this oil rig 80 miles out in the Gulf of Mexico, 80 miles out from Cameron, Louisiana. And so one summer, I went out there and worked in that oil rig, which was an incredibly dangerous job. I think you may know that, particularly back in those days, it was one of the most dangerous jobs there was. And I learned a lot out there because it was hard work, it was tough work. And when I showed up, I was the only non-Cajun on the oil rig. And I had brand new equipment, brand new helmet, brand new clothes, the whole thing. And I stuck out like a sore thumb. And so the first night, actually, they started pushing me back and forth in the shower. And I fought back and I gained the respect as a result of that. And so I learned about teamwork and respect, and there were a lot of good lessons in that job.
Well, that's actually, I have background in the oil business as well. And I was just curious when I heard that. And I thought we'd talk about that for a second. So you got the white hard hat, all clean, everything's pristine, and they're all Cajun. So you're like a foreigner.
Exactly. Exactly.
So what would be one, you said that there are several things. What would be one thing, Tom, that you think that you take all the way back from that internship in the summer when you were in college that you think maybe helped you throughout your career?
Well, I guess it would probably be that hard work and really hard work pays off, because that was an extraordinarily difficult job and extraordinarily dangerous, but really hard work. And they gave the rookies the hardest job of all. So my job was to sandblast what's called the tinder, which is what you live on during the time that you're working on the oil rig. And the tinder is connected. It's an old Navy ship where the roustabouts, which is what I was, live and spend their time. So my job was to sandblast the tinder. And so I had to stand out there 12 or 13 hours a day, holding my arms up with a heavy deep sea diving suit on in incredible heat, just to be able to do this job. So it was incredibly difficult job. So it taught me a lesson about hard work.
You had people later in your career that were complaining that it was hard, and then you said you have no idea, right? So yeah. The upcoming book is about having a great fit. So let's just talk a little bit about what the book is going to be, and then I want to ask you some questions about it.
Okay. Well, a great fit really refers to two things. It refers to the fit of a finely tailored suit, and it refers to a great fit in the job. So there's a dual kind of a mechanism at work there. And so that's really where that came from.
So we don't usually spend a ton of time on the show talking about career advice directly. I mean, obviously we talk a lot of things about helping us be more effective leaders, and that's all career related. But in this book, you're going to talk about how you find the right fit in a job. So talk about that. How do we know, and how do we look for and find the right fit for ourselves in our roles?
Well, I think one of the most important things is you have to really enjoy the work. You have to find a good fit in that you'll enjoy what you're doing, because to be effective, you have to enjoy your work. And so I think that's a very key component of that. And you have to be able to be a team player. You have to enjoy working with the people that you're around. And those are the kinds of things that come to mind when I think of a good fit.
So one of the things you've already mentioned, I think 3 times in the short time we've been chatting, about the idea of being a member of a team. And, even as a senior executive in your last role, but throughout our careers as a leader, we're also members of teams. In fact, I always say we're a member of 2 teams. We're the member of the team that we lead, and we're a member of the team of our peers. So I'd really love for you to talk from that sort of senior executive perspective about teamwork and being a team player. I know that you've thought a lot about that, and I know there's going to be some stuff in the book about that. So can we talk about, from your perspective, what does it take to be a great team player?
Well, first of all, you have to surround yourself with really talented people, which I did. I was very fortunate to have an amazingly talented team of people that I enjoyed working with, and I enjoyed being part of their team. And so we work very closely as a team, and that's really what that means to me.
So let's talk about this, because I mentioned that a second ago, this idea that as a leader, we're on at least 2 teams. I mean, maybe on project teams or whatever, but we're on the team of our peers, right? And we're leading a team. What's your advice for people, maybe earlier mid-career, about how to focus their time? Like, because I've observed leaders who spend all their time really on the peer team and thinking up, and others who really focus themselves on the team they're leading, and to the detriment perhaps of the peer team. What's your advice or counsel about how do you balance those 2, or how do you think about being a team member on more than one team?
Well, it is a balance of both those things, as you just said, and you have to be a part of the team, and you have to be able to provide leadership from above. But the 2 components are equally important.
Okay. So in your career, in your executive career, what would be, I guess I have a couple of questions for you, because not everyone that's listening gets the chance to have the conversation with someone who sat in the C-suite for 17 years like you did. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions. We can talk about that a little bit from the perspective of You mentioned that you surrounded yourself with a great team. Talk about what are you looking for in the folks that you wanted to have on your team specifically? What are the kinds of skills were you looking for or were especially important to you?
Well, number one is talent. They had to possess incredible talent at what they were doing, what they were hired to do. And that was the key to it. And then mutual respect, and they had to be team players. And that was it. We always had a team culture. And that's what I think made Calvin Klein so successful during the time that I was there.
So I'm going to shift gears just for a second because you're in the clothing business, apparel business. That world I can only imagine continues to change a lot. How is that business different now than it was, say, 10, 15 years ago? What's different about it?
I would say to you that it's fundamentally the same. Fashion changes, but the business is fundamentally the same. Now, there are things like, e-commerce is a much bigger part of the business than it was then. It was more of a brick and mortar business at that time, and the e-commerce thing was just becoming what it is today. But fundamentally, it's the same kind of thing. And the other thing is that we were not only in the clothing business, we were in many other businesses. We were in 40 businesses altogether, including fragrance and home products and, all kinds of things. We were in over 40 different businesses in over 75 countries. So it was truly a global business and very, very diversified in terms of product categories.
So when you got that many things to manage and that many folks to lead, it would seem to me that one of the things that is critical to your success is the ability to have strong skills in execution, both for your team and for yourself. And I know that in the book, you're going to talk about some stages or pieces of execution. So can you sort of fill us in from your perspective on what the stages of execution are, or what are the things we ought to be thinking about if we want to become more proficient at executing on projects and plans?
Well, I think it's about leadership. I think that, you've got to provide leadership to your team. And, vision and leadership focus on. And you have to have, a short-term vision and a long-term vision, and which is what I always had. And, I think that that's one of the reasons that I was successful in what I was doing.
Okay. So got the clear vision. We know where we're trying to go. And then then you're saying we need to just make sure we stay focused on execution on a daily basis, correct?
That's correct.
All right. Awesome. So we're going to shift gears, Tom, just for a second. I've got the next section of the show that we call the Fast Break, and that is sponsored by my new book, The Long Distance Leader. You can learn more about being a more effective remote leader if you're leading a remote team by going to longdistanceleaderbook.com. You can get a sample chapter and learn more about the book there. So, Tom, what I have here now are 3 ideas, and I'm just going to share them with you one at a time, and you can sort of riff off them, talk about whatever you want to talk about as it relates to these 3 ideas, okay?
Okay.
All right. The first one is power.
Well, I think when you have a job like I had, that was CEO of a major brand and a major volume brand, you have a lot of power, but you have to be careful how you use it. And you have to wield it, as I said, in a very careful way. And you can't think that power is everything, because it's not. It's fragile. But if you have power, you have to use it wisely.
All right, and you're right. We have some that comes positionally, and then there's a lot. Some people in the same position will have more power than others based on what's granted to us by those that are following us. I think your point about it being fragile and taking good care of it is an excellent point. The second one, a little more pragmatic perhaps, is delegation. What are your thoughts on delegation?
Well, when you're running a big business with as many moving parts as Calvin Klein was, you can't survive without delegation. And you can't delegate if you don't have a talented team. So I was very good, I believe, at delegating, and I did delegate. And I kept the minimum of decision-making at my level. But I had to be there. I had to be able to make the tough calls. I had to provide, leadership and oversight and all of those things. But but that was an important piece of it.
All right. And the last one is strategy. Thoughts on strategy?
Well, you have to have strategy. And, we always had a strategy. Again, a short-term strategy and a long-term strategy. And when we were at 2.8 billion, we had a strategy to get to 8 billion. And we executed that strategy. And that was the way we got there. It wasn't by chance. It was by a carefully planned strategy, which we were able to execute. My team and I were able to execute.
Okay, awesome. So now I think you're in a little different stage of life. You're finishing this book, and by the time some people are reading this, they are watching this or listening to this, they may be able to read the book. We'll talk more about that in a sec. But you're in that retirement stage. I think it kind of looks like you're very comfortable and relaxed, all tanned and everything. So my question is, what do you do for fun?
I play golf.
And so I bet a lot more now than you used to.
Yeah, well, right now my club is closed, so I'm not playing right now. I belong to Trump International, and they only open during the season, so I'm not really playing very much right now. But when the club opens, I'll be back out there, and I play with my wife, and so I look forward to that.
All right, awesome. And as you know, I ask smart people that I meet this question, and I ask every guest that I have here on the show what they're reading or what you've read recently. And so what's something that sometime, Tom, that you've read recently that people might find interesting?
Well, I read the book, the James Patterson book, All American Murder, recently, and I thought that was a fascinating book, and I love his work anyway. But I've never read a James Patterson book that I didn't enjoy, but this one I found particularly interesting.
All right, excellent. So we've talked a little bit about the book, and as I said, as we're speaking and as people are listening, if they're listening when the show first premieres, the book won't be out yet, but it's coming soon. Tell us about the book and how they can learn more about it and you.
Well, the book is really about my life. It's not just about my career at Calvin Klein. It's about my whole life. And then, of course, my career at Calvin Klein is an important piece to that. But I think people will find the book an interesting read. I think it's a page turner. And that's what I've been told by the people that have read it. So, I hope that's the case, and I believe that will be.
And where will they be able to get it? I mean, other than places like Amazon, where can they learn more about you and your work and the book when they get the chance to hear this?
Well, I think that it's going to be, we're looking for a publisher. My agent is looking for a publisher now. So I think that we'll find, a major publisher. And so I think you'll be able to find it in Amazon, but you'll be able to find it in bookstores. You'll be able to find it in a lot of different retailers.
And people will be able to go to your website at tommurry.com, correct?
That's right. That's correct.
So that's just so everyone's got it. TOMMURRY.com.
That's correct.
All right. So that's where you can go, everybody. So now I've got a question for all of you before we go. And that question is, now what? You had the chance to listen in as we had this conversation with Tom for the last few minutes, talking about his experience as a leader and senior executive. And so my question to you is, what from this will you take that you can apply to your work as a leader and in your life? So the question is, now what? What action will you take as a result of this? Maybe you got an insight from Tom as he talked about power, or maybe you got an insight from him as we talked about how do you select talent for your team, or wherever else you found value. The question is not just, was this interesting, but how are you going to apply it? So Tom, thanks so much for being with us. It was a pleasure to have you today.
Kevin, it was my pleasure. Thank you very much.
All right. So everybody, we're here every week with a new expert, with a new leader to talk to you, to help you become the leader you were born to be, right here on the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.